The Danish rock stars Volbeat have produced 8 albums across their 2-decade career, garnering massive amounts of success from hit singles like Still Counting, Heaven Nor Hell, A Warrior's Call, The Hangman's Body Count, Black Rose, and many more. However, Volbeat's road to fame has had its share of peaks and valleys, which is why in this video, we are going to answer the question, what's the best Volbeat album of all time? Volbeat began as an offshoot of lead singer and rhythm guitarist Michael Poulsen's previous metal group Dominus, alongside fellow bandmates John Larson on drums, Anders Kohlholm on bass, and Franz Hellboss Gottschalk on lead guitar. Aside from Hellboss, who departed in 2006, this would be the lineup for over half of Volbeat's records. Hellboss recorded on 2 albums, including Volbeat's first record, The Strength, The Sound, The Songs, which just so happens to take the bottom spot on today's list. Volbeat's debut release was a late bloomer, hitting the Danish charts almost a year after publishing. From that point on, the record performed well in the band's home country, but the label Mascot Records lacked the means to distribute abroad properly, meaning the album was essentially non-existent in the United States. Also hurting the record's performance was the lack of singles, other than their cover of Dusty Springfield's I Only Want to Be With You. Unless the whole record is covers, releasing only one single and having it be a cover sends a very misguided message for what your record is about, and your band for that matter. Whoever made that decision did not think that went through well. But this list isn't based on the commercial success of each record, but rather the musical quality, creativity, mixing, and performances of each record. So, why does this album take the bottom spot on my list? Well, Volbeat is thankfully the type of band that's constantly pushing the envelope and experimenting with new ideas. As a result, they've improved considerably over time. So by extension, the record with the least amount of experience and polish backing it takes the bottom spot of the list. Leading up to the breakup of Dominus, Poulsen was getting sick of the death metal scene and sought to take his music in a new direction. However, since he wasn't looking to completely 180 his style, The Strength is somewhat of a transition between his old sound and the Volbeat we know today. This record is dark and aggressive, with plenty of fast riffs and heavy drums, but it also has moments of Volbeat's signature rockabilly and groove metal sound. Say Your Number and Rebel Monster have relentless double bass parts, while Pool of Booze Booze Booza and Caroline No. 1 are swung and have an odd mix of operatic and plain goofy vocals from Poulsen. 2 songs from this record, Danny and Lucy 11 p.m. and Fire Song, are the opening numbers of a story spanning 4 Volbeat records, though dissecting their thematic content and figuring out this story proves difficult without actually having the lyrics in front of you. Maybe it's just me, but sometimes Michael Poulsen's vocals can be downright unintelligible. This is partially due to his accent, but more because of his creative decisions while singing. Poulsen loves to affect his voice like he's impersonating an opera singer, or sometimes even Elvis Presley. It makes sense given how he grew up listening to Elvis and Johnny Cash and Chuck Berry, and it works with Volbeat's rockabilly-esque approach to metal. He was relatively young at the time of this record, and like many young singers, he lacks control and good melodic instincts. Vocal melodies on The Strength are forgettable and bland, and many of his lines are harsh and pitchy. He blends decently with the rest of the instruments, which are by far the best parts of this record, but the songs become quickly exhausting due to how grating his voice can be. Let's be clear though, I do not hold this against him. I'm sure I'd say the same thing about myself if I were to reflect on my voice in 20 years. And don't worry, if you want a deeper breakdown of Michael's unique vocal style, keep watching because it will definitely resurface with upcoming albums. So we know this record lands at the bottom of the list and is therefore what I consider to be Volbeat's worst. But how does it shape up in context to other records? To answer this question, I decided not only to rank all 8 albums, but also score them using my patented metrics. And you can see a full breakdown of each score using the link in the description of this video. For a debut album, The Strength is far from perfect, but it's also far from being the worst thing in existence. The instrumentals are strong, but Poulsen's vocals and obscure lyrics unfortunately drop the ball and make this record forgettable when held up against what's to come. This is one of 2 Volbeat records that I rarely come back to for that exact reason. But I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge its positives and importance in setting the stage for Volbeat's arrival onto the rock scene. For these reasons, I'm giving The Strength, The Sound, The Songs a 6.5 out of 10. Claiming 7th place on today's list is Volbeat's 7th album, Rewind, Replay, Rebound. Also receiving the award for the biggest disappointment of this entire list. Rewind was the first new record to come out after I discovered the band. So I was still in that honeymoon phase where I believed they could do no wrong. I expected something as mind-blowing as what I'd recently come to love, like any sane person would do. But when Rewind flopped, that ended my honeymoon phase, and I was suddenly forced to accept the harsh reality that Volbeat isn't perfect. It's a sad thought, but ultimately a rational one, as every band is bound to make some blunders along the way. To describe this one, I'd use the word misguided. Rewind lacks edge, something present in all other Volbeat albums. Throughout their career, they've been known for having intense metal and hard rock songs with dark riffs and heavy drums. But this album is missing all of that. It's as if they produced a series of R-rated movies with a lot of gore, violence, and profanity, and then suddenly put out a tame PG-13 sequel where they never show any blood. Of course, on every Volbeat album, there are at least 1 or 2 lighter songs that are just standard melodic rock, like Lola Montez or Back to Prom. But the problem here is that every song on Rewind is like this, and that's not what Volbeat fans signed up for. The songs are fine, but very few of them stick with me after listening, as they're all subpar compared to their counterparts on other records. Part of what makes these tracks so good on other records is that they're used sparingly, so having a full album of them just feels wrong. I should mention though, there is one song that is partially an exception. The Everlasting. The main riff and verses of this song are textbook Volbeat, but the chorus leans closer to the typical sound on Rewind, so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. And I can't exactly say that I was wowed by this song just because it has a heavy-ish riff. The whole song is pretty forgettable, and the same goes for the rest of the album. After my first couple times listening to it, I was horribly underwhelmed and decided not to keep listening and instead go back to what I loved. And then when I was researching this video, I was hoping my opinions would have changed over time, but listening back to the record again only served to reinforce my original opinions. The album is bland, lacking the conviction and creative genius of previous Volbeat records. It's a harsh thing to say, but there is very little worth revisiting on this album. So if my opinion of this record is so low, why is it not in last place? Well, if I had to find something positive to say, it'd be that the whole record is performed and mixed well. Michael's voice is crystal clear and easy to understand, and every instrumental part is really tight. However, there's only so much clean performances can do for your record if the songwriting kinda sucks. So let me make sure that my opinion is clear. I don't think this album is bad, per se. It's just not Volbeat. It's tame and lackluster compared to the wealth of hard rock riffs that their catalog has to offer. I have no desire to listen to it since it doesn't fulfill the needs for which I seek out Volbeat, but I know that may not be the case for everyone. If you prefer the lighter side of Volbeat and enjoy this record, then all the power to you. I don't want to diminish anyone else's feelings on this record, just express my own. And admittedly, if this album is one of the worst things that they'll ever put out, then it's really not that bad in the grand scheme of things. However, we've still got many albums left to discuss, so for a final score, I'm giving Rewind, Replay, Rebound a 7.1 out of 10. All right, brace yourselves for some whiplash, because after jumping ahead 6 records, we're leaping back 5 spots to Volbeat's sophomore album, Rock the Rebel, Metal the Devil. This is what I consider to be the first good enough record. It's got some decent riffs and moments, and I'll come back to it every now and then for specific songs, but I don't often find myself listening to the record top to bottom. It shows the band's potential and desire for growth, as it's a massive step forward compared to its predecessor, but they were still young and trying to find their niche. Rock the Rebel had the same lineup as their first record, meaning that the band could really solidify their sound with greater finesse, though guitarist Franz Hellboss would be replaced by Thomas Bredal following the production of the album. The record was a chart-topping hit in Denmark, but it failed to gain any traction in the USA for the exact same reason as the Strength to Soundless Songs: limited distribution. Admittedly though, I don't think this album ever would have performed well in the States, for a couple of reasons. Since the early 2000s, Europe has been dominated by rock and metal, whereas the United States have been much more divided between rap, hip-hop, pop, alternative, and like a million other forms of music. That's why you see so many massive rock and metal festivals being hosted in Western Europe. Being European, Volbeat were making the exact kind of music that fellow Europeans wanted to hear. Heavy rock and metal with big personalities. But that's not what's popular across the Atlantic. Sure, there are plenty of successful bands who do that here, but they're basically the 1% of rock and metal. There are countless other bands from Europe or inspired by European rock that have never made it big playing the same style of music in the United States. Anyways, my point to this little tangent is that Volbeat were doing exactly what they needed to get a foothold locally, but it wasn't the right fit for American audiences. Yet. We'll get there eventually. Rock the Rebel is Volbeat's shortest album to date, with only 11 songs lasting 42.5 minutes. Like their 2004 record, they only released one single in Denmark, The Garden's Tale, but it was surprisingly successful on their home charts and on MTV Denmark. The song also features Johan Olsen, who would later collab with Volbeat again for their 2016 hit For Livet. Fun fact, in addition to being a vocalist for a rock band, Olsen is a guest researcher for molecular biology at the University of Copenhagen. Crazy what some people can do with their free time, huh? Other notable songs from this album include Mr. and Mrs. Ness, which continues the story of the Ness family established in the previous record, along with Sad Man's Tongue, which has one of the most entertaining vocal parts of any Volbeat song, period. The way Poulsen hits that low note at the end of the chorus and then adds some vocal fry really reminds me of strumming a twangy open string on a guitar. It's a great effect, though it certainly took me some time to get used to it. Really, that's the story with this entire record. There's some good stuff, but it requires becoming acclimated to Poulsen's voice to truly appreciate everything happening under the surface. Unfortunately, that's not the easiest thing to do, because his vocals are genuinely hard to understand at first. Throughout Volbeat's discography, Michael produces his vocal sound at the back of his throat as opposed to the front of his mouth, which causes the tone of his voice to become a lot richer and darker. This is done to imitate blues and country singers from the 20th century like Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley, with whom he grew up listening. Unfortunately though, it also obscures vowels and consonants and causes syllables to blend together. So you have to find that right balance of richness and brightness so that way your words can maintain their clarity. The ideal blend is different depending on the style of music, but in Poulsen's case, I find that his tone is usually too dark and swallowed to be understood correctly. He improves this with every record, but early albums like Rock the Rebel and The Strength to Sound the Songs are bad culprits of this botched technique. If I've read the lyrics or listened to a song enough, I can usually ignore it, but sometimes that tone just makes it so hard to understand him that it sounds like he's just singing in gibberish. And as you can imagine, it's difficult to appreciate music when it just sounds like an unintelligible mess. Rock the Rebel has the foundations of a great album, but it lacks the polish needed to take it all the way and make it an international success. However, it was a pivotal record in Volbeat for their home country, which would provide the support needed to do bigger and better things on their next album. I'll listen to certain songs every now and then if I'm in the right mood, but I don't seek this record out on a regular basis. When I want the best of what Volbeat has to offer, there are many more albums to choose from. For final score, I'm giving Rock the Rebel, Metal the Devil a 7.8 out of 10. Hey, before we break into the top 5, let me know your favorite Volbeat album down in the comments. Following their sophomore record, Volbeat had a quick turnaround for 2008's Guitar Gangsters and Cadillac Blood, which also happens to be the next spot on this list. This is the band's only release so far featuring a song with the exact same title as the album, though 2 other records contain songs with titles closely related to their respective albums. The song in question was the record's leading single and one of my personal favorites by this band, Guitar Gangsters and Cadillac Blood. It also represents a clear turning point for Volbeat, as they were leaning further and further into musical and lyrical themes that I can only describe as dark Old West. Maybe I'm biased though, since I first fell in love with Volbeat while playing Red Dead Redemption. Something about this record underscoring John Marston's escapades across New Austin just worked perfectly. And now whenever I listen to Volbeat, it makes me want to pick up RDR2 for some good old-fashioned gunslinging. Not only was this record pivotal for the band's aesthetic, but it also signified an up-level in their songwriting abilities. Despite coming out only a year after Rock the Rebel, this album is leagues better than its predecessor, especially in Poulsen's vocals. His melodies are much more distinct and pleasant, while still maintaining Volbeat's metal aggression. His pitch is also a lot more accurate, indicating increased vocal maturity. This was the band's first record with Thomas Bredal on lead guitar, as Franz Helbos had left shortly after recording the previous album. Bredal's parts offer a new layer of depth to this album, strengthening all of the melodies and making the record more approachable to new audiences. Personally, I feel like this record is the first instance of Volbeat achieving their true sound. That may sound confusing, so let me elaborate. As I see it, a band's true sound is the style or approach of songwriting that really defines the majority of their catalog. This sound is what comprises their best songs, and is usually what most people want to hear from them. For example, Alter Bridge's true sound was established early on in their career with their sophomore album Blackbird, when Miles Kennedy began contributing guitar on top of vocals. Sure, bands can experiment and change over time, as both Alter Bridge and Volbeat have done, but most will settle on a particular method of performing and writing music that's distinct to them, and then stick with it for the long term. In Volbeat's case, they still had some remnants of the death metal scene in their first two albums, but with Guitar Gangsters, they completely morphed it into an approachable form of grooving hard rock with influence from cowboy folklore. Now, if that's not unique, I don't know what it is. This record has a lot of interesting tracks to it, like Marianne's Place, which continues the tale of the Ness family first introduced on their debut record. Additionally, it contains two country covers from the 1950s, Hank Williams' I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, and Jimmy Work's Making Believe. Ironically, these are two of my favorite songs from this album, though there are plenty more great tracks like Back to Prom, Wild Rover of Hell, and Maybelline Have to Hold Her, to name a few. One of the most influential songs from this record, though, is the internationally successful hit Still Counting. I imagine I'm not the only one who discovered Volbeat by hearing this exact song on the radio, though what's odd is that it was released as a single nearly 4 years after the album. During this time, Volbeat dropped their fourth record, Beyond Hell Above Heaven, in 2010, which features Still Counting as a bonus track, so I assumed that it was from that record and not from Guitar Gangsters. Since Beyond Hell achieved huge success in the USA, the band decided to release Still Counting as a single, which was met with overwhelming positivity. It's hard to say whether this would have been the case if Beyond Hell hadn't come out first and warmed up the crowd, so to speak, but hey, I guess we'll never know. Guitar Gangsters was a turning point for Volbeat, both in terms of their musical and thematic choices. While it wasn't directly responsible for the band's international success, it laid the groundwork for the band to captivate foreign audiences by storm. It's an entertaining collection of songs with virtually no dull moments, though it's not as polished as Volbeat would eventually be capable of. For those reasons, I'm giving Guitar Gangsters and Cadillac Blood an 8.7 out of 10. Coming in at fourth place is Volbeat's fourth record, Beyond Hell Above Heaven. Man, placing this one was tough, since it's got so many great tracks like Heaven Nor Hell, Being One, Fallen, and A Warrior's Call. This was Volbeat's fourth record with Jacob Hansen at the producer's desk, so it's safe to say they'd found their rhythm by this point. His mixing of each record was steadily improving, but Beyond Hell is where he finally hit the nail right on the head. Every part is crystal clear with loads of power, and the tones on each song are punchy and dynamic. This record starts with one of my favorite Volbeat openers, The Mirror and the Ripper, a classic thrash-inspired track, followed immediately by one of Volbeat's biggest breakout tracks, Heaven Nor Hell. This song, along with a few others from this record, were largely responsible for the band's success in the United States, as it received copious amounts of radio play. Alongside Still Counting, Heaven Nor Hell was basically the song that got me into Volbeat, and I imagine that was the case for thousands of other rock fans during the 2010s. Now, years later, it doesn't quite hold up to some of the band's lesser-known tracks, but it's still a damn good song by all rights. This record continues Volbeat's trend of featuring guest artists on at least one track, the most notable in my opinion being Mark Greenway of Napalm Death providing dirty vocals on the song Evelyn. I don't usually avoid songs from this record or from any others in the top 5, but I cannot stand this song. Greenway's incomprehensible growling is just not pleasant to listen to, and I've never been a fan of dirty vocals as a primary method of singing. I have very specific preferences when it comes to screaming in rock and metal, and this song just isn't it. And if we're being honest, my distaste for this song is a large reason why Beyond Hell settles in at 4th. No record from here on out has a skippable song in my opinion, and though that's also the case for Guitar Gangsters, this record has some other strengths that help it beat out its predecessor. One such strength is the quality of guitar riffs. I've said before how I feel one of Volbeat's greatest strengths is their riffs, and much of that stems from this record. Nearly every track has an original engaging guitar part, and they all sound radically different from one another. Take for example the 3rd track, Who They Are, and its immediate successor, Fallen. The former is broad, menacing, and foreboding, while the latter is filled with motion and life. Or how about Magic Zone, a jubilant swung pattern with plenty of room for John Larson to show off on drums at the same time. And speaking of John Larson, can we talk about how good that guy is? He is one of the most consistently good drummers in all of rock. His blend of energetic thrash and a larger-than-life sound makes for some truly unique playing. This guy can go from blazing fast double kick to massive halftime jams in the blink of an eye like it's nothing. He always knows exactly what to play and when to play it, and never anything more or less. Like, I think we can all tell from his recordings that he could do much more than he does with Volbeat, but he doesn't because he's got a lot of control and never wants to outplay a section. He does have moments where he'll show off, like during the bridge of Magic Zone, but it's never too much. John Larson is just as integral to Volbeat as Michael Poulsen, and I really hope that he sticks with this band for the long haul, like he already has. Aside from 1 or 2 blemishes, Beyond Hell is a great record with a lot to offer from every member of the band. Poulsen's vocals have steadily improved, though they're still not perfect. He's still producing much of the sound in the back of his throat, creating that rounded operatic sound that can get fatiguing after a while. It's not constant, which is a sign that he's learning how to manipulate his tone with more freedom, but there's still some room for improvement, which we'll see in upcoming records. In any case, if I was asked which album a new fan should start with to become acclimated to Volbeat's eclectic brand of rock, this album would be a strong contender as it was the gateway drug for many new fans of the band, myself included. For a final score, I'm giving Beyond Hell Above Heaven an 8.9 out of 10. With that, we are on to the top 3, but before we continue, let me know in the comments which band's discography I should rank next. In 3rd place, we have the newest addition to Volbeat's catalog, Servant of the Mind, released in December of 2021. Back when this album came out, I paid no attention to it because of how disappointed I was with its predecessor, assuming that it would have that same half-hearted energy of a band past its prime. Boy, was I wrong. When I listened to this record back in November for my end of 2022 Blitz review, I was taken aback by how much I enjoyed it. And instantly, I was pissed at myself for making a snap conclusion about this record early on with absolutely no foundation. I missed out on listening to it for a full year, and that was a massive mistake. But enough wallowing in self-pity. Let's talk about why it was such a huge mistake for me to write this album off. The first thing that surprised me was the stylistic divergence of the title. Think about it. Every other Volbeat album has multiple subjects or phrases in the title. For example, Rock the Rebel, Metal the Devil. Beyond Hell, Above Heaven, Seal the Deal, and Let's Boogie. This is their first record breaking that trend, as it only has a single subject in the title, and it really feels different. Though that feeling can also be attributed to the musical and lyrical content, as this record is unlike anything the band has put out thus far. Many songs like Temple of Euchre and Say No More are high energy and thrashy, as if they're pulling heavy influence from Metallica. However, there are still lighter, approachable rock songs like Wait a Minute My Girl and Dagenfer, and classic Volbeat jams in Shotgun Blues and The Passenger. Covers are notably absent again, as they were with Rewind, Replay, Rebound, though the deluxe edition on Spotify does contain a cover of Metallica's Don't Tread on Me. Despite lacking covers, the band has still kept up their trend of utilizing guest musicians though. Mia Maha makes her 3rd appearance as a backing vocalist for a 1/3 of the tracks, and Danish pop singer Stein Bramsen carries the vocals for Dagenfer. I love that they brought back Danish vocals for the chorus of this song, as I find the sound of the language so captivating. Though I will say this song isn't quite as good as its spiritual predecessor from Seal the Deal and Let's Boogie. One other distinct feature of this record is the use of psychedelic instrumental motifs. One way I like to describe this idea of musical psychedelia is demonic surfer rock, which is quite apparent in songs like Step Into Light, Becoming, and The Devil Rages On. The specific use of chromaticism by emphasizing the flat 2 and flat 6 gives these songs a very specific sound and mood. Combine that with that unmistakable twangy guitar tone of beach music, and it sounds like demonic surfer rock. Maybe that's just me though. Also, I want to talk about something else with that last song I mentioned, The Devil Rages On. About 3 minutes in, the song hits the bridge and strips away almost every instrument aside for some chunking guitars. Then, Poulsen comes in with one of the coolest parts I've ever heard from Volbeat. Now, a fair warning. This part is the vocal equivalent of Jeffrey Dean Morgan chewing the scenery as Negan in The Walking Dead. But the fact that it's so over the top is what makes it so cool. Poulsen's growls are practically animalistic, and if you haven't already bought into Volbeat's ambitious style, you may find them ridiculous. However, Volbeat is one of my favorite bands, and I've grown accustomed to their more melodramatic elements, so I'm all for crazy growls like this. Servant of the Mind is exactly the revitalization Volbeat needed to stay relevant. Some loyalty to previous albums is present, but this record also has a unique flair that makes it stand out across their discography. I've barely had any time with it compared to the rest of their catalog, but I can comfortably say that it's one of my favorite Volbeat records. However, it's not perfect. I'm definitely weighted towards certain tracks, and others are less appealing due to some odd melodic and harmonic choices. For any fans of baseball out there, this record bats a solid 300. Not the best, but still pretty damn good. If you remember from my end of 2022 live stream, I decided to give the record a score of 9.1. But after some consideration, I've determined this score doesn't accurately portray my opinion of this album. It's almost right. But Michael's vocals have never been better, and the original score just didn't reflect that. So for a corrected final score, I'm giving Servant of the Mind a 9.3 out of 10. Coming in at second place, it's Seal the Deal and Let's Boogie, Volbeat's sixth studio record released in the summer of 2016. This album marks the conception of Volbeat's current lineup, with Casper Boyd Larson taking over on bass and Rob Caggiano on lead guitar for his second album. The record also remains faithful to Volbeat's habit of including guest artists and covers. Several tracks make use of Mia Maha on backing vocals, and the reverent Goodbye Forever showcases the Harlem Gospel Choir at the song's apex. Additionally, Johan Olsen provides chorus vocals in Danish on Forrivet, marking his second appearance with Volbeat, and Danko Jones sings the verses of Black Rose. What's odd about these two tracks, though, is that their North American versions lack the guest artists, and Forrivet is renamed The Bliss and sung entirely in English. I don't like to discuss deluxe or alternate versions of albums for my reviews, as I find it can create unintended bias, but this is one instance where I need to. Quite frankly, I have no idea why they released a separate version for the United States. I love the added textures of Olsen and Jones's vocals, and even though the chorus of Forrivet is in a different language, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard. I freaking love this song so much, to the point where it might just be my favorite Volbeat song of all time. And since I've already broken my rule on deluxe editions, I'll just say that the minute-long bonus track Sladen is badass and has such a great riff. I wish this one had been further developed, but hey, maybe it's good because it's short. Thematically, Seal the Deal was new territory for the band, as it goes in a different direction than the dark western themes of albums prior. Poulsen described the record as dark and spiritual, as well as leaning closer to straight-up rock than metal. Some of the previously mentioned songs like Forrivet and Goodbye Forever, as well as Let It Burn and You Will Know, support this point, as these are some of the most, quote, radio-friendly songs that the band has ever produced. But they still knew how to dig in and grind out some killer hard rock and metal tracks, like the bombastic opener, The Devil's Bleeding Crown, the partial title track and third single, Seal the Deal, or the album's incredible closing track, The Lowest Crossroad. Fun fact, when I was in high school, I loved the riffs from these songs so much that it inspired parts for several of my own songs, though none were as batshit awesome as Volbeat's renditions. The solos in Bleeding Crown and Seal the Deal are fantastic, and the full band hits at the end of The Lowest Crossroad still give me chills every time I hear them. Talk about some incredible guitar work. I mentioned earlier how this record contains some covers, and these songs have baffled me for the longest time, as they feel a little out of place on this album. Rebound is a basketball-themed 2000s punk rock song by Teenage Bottle Rocket, whereas Battleship Chains was written by Terry Anderson for southern rock band The Georgia Satellites' 1986 self-titled debut album. Both covers are nearly identical to their originals, and though they're mixed properly to blend with the rest of the album sonically, the songwriting and lyrics of these tracks are so out of left field that they stick out like sore thumbs. I should clarify, I don't think that they're bad covers by any means, but they're just odd choices for an album with such abstract and conceptual themes as Seal the Deal. I think if these songs had been omitted and or replaced with others, it's possible this album would have been my #1 pick. I genuinely can't think of anything else to critique besides these two covers, which just goes to show how advanced Volbeat's songwriting had become at this point. Seal the Deal is a fantastic record with amazing guitar riffs, solos, bass lines, drum parts, and vocals. Its only downfalls are two oddly placed covers that don't really add anything to the overall experience of the record. Without these tracks, I'd feel confident in giving the album a perfect score, but since that's not the case, I'm giving Seal the Deal and Let's Boogie a 9.5 out of 10. So we've got one record left, and it's got to beat an already impressive score of 9.5. With my rubric, that means basically no margin for error, and the music needs to be near flawless. In my opinion, the one Volbeat album to accomplish this feat is none other than 2013's Outlaw Gentlemen and Shady Ladies. This record saw the introduction of Anthrax's Rob Caggiano as co-producer and lead guitarist, a decision that directly contributed to Volbeat's recent successes. Caggiano's contributions took Volbeat from a budding metal band to a force to be reckoned with. Don't get me wrong, Thomas Bradall's work in the first half of the band's catalog is good, but Rob Caggiano was the missing link to send Volbeat to the top of the charts, as this record and its immediate successor hit #9 and #4 respectively on the Billboard 200, not to mention also ranking high in Germany, Denmark, and the UK. But enough about the commercial successes of this album. What makes it the best Volbeat record for me? Well, one of the record's oddest traits is actually a good answer. Outlaw Gentlemen had a whopping 8 singles across its 14 tracks, which is among the highest number of singles ever released for a contemporary artist. Releasing 8 singles from one album is very unorthodox for a rock band in the 21st century, but amazingly, every song they released does work as a single, and for varying reasons. You have insane metal tracks like The Hangman's Body Count and Doc Holliday, as well as lively rock songs like Lola Montez and Pearl Heart. One of the album's more unique singles is Lonesome Rider, featuring the fantastic Sarah Blackwood. And though Room 24 featuring King Diamond wasn't officially made a single, it was nominated for a Grammy for Best Metal Performance. As far as I know, this is the highest accolade the band has ever received, though they definitely deserve more recognition than they've got so far. Anyways, now if we look beyond the singles at the remaining tracks, we'll see that each one holds up to the same level of scrutiny and quality as the rest. The opening instrumental, Let's Shake Some Dust, is the perfect mood setter for an outlaw-themed record, with great harmonica work by Paul Lamb. Black Bart and Our Loved Ones help balance this record with moody riffs and big drums, the latter song also featuring Paul Lamb. And in typical fashion, Volbeat covers a track well outside their wheelhouse called My Body by Young the Giant. But this song works so well with the surrounding tracks that I had no idea it was a cover until I researched this video. The lyrics of the song discussing trains and embarking on a road alone fit perfectly with the Western vibe of this record, despite having been written in a completely different context. Given that Volbeat was going for a pretty overt theme with this album, I'm so glad that they picked a cover that matches that theme, since it makes this record that much more interesting as a result. Outlaw Gentlemen is just one killer track after another with absolutely no low points. Everything great about Volbeat is on display. Fantastic instrumentals that push the bounds of hard rock, grand vocals with Michael's unique flair, exceptional songwriting and storytelling, and thoughtful inclusions of covers and guest artists. This record is the epitome of everything Volbeat has to offer, and if you wanted to show someone one record summarizing everything about them, this album would suffice. I mentioned in the last section that the only reason I didn't give Seal the Deal a perfect score was because of its covers. So you might think that I'd give this record a perfect score then. Unfortunately, I still don't think I can grant that to Volbeat yet. This record excels in every regard, but I do need to dock some points for Poulsen's vocals. He's come a long way at this point, but I still prefer the sound from more recent records like Seal the Deal and Sermon to the Mind. It's not enough of a deduction to lose first place, but I can't in good conscience grant this record a perfect score. So with all that in mind, for a final score, I'm giving Outlaw Gentlemen and Shady Ladies a 9.7 out of 10, as well as the accolade of being the best Volbeat album ever produced. If you're interested in watching more videos where I review a band's full discography, let me know in the comments which band I should cover next, and check out this playlist to see if I've already done it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.